The last transmission came through at 0347 hours, and then there was nothing but static. Sergeant Maya Chun pressed the headset tighter against her ears, her fingers flying across the console as she cycled through every frequency, every backup channel, every emergency protocol she had ever learned. 16 men from Delta Force's most elite unit had gone dark in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, and she was the only one who knew exactly where they were when the silence began. The forward operating base around her hummed with its usual nighttime quiet, unaware that somewhere in those frozen peaks, American soldiers were either fighting for their lives or had already lost them. Maya's heart pounded against her ribs as she made a decision that would either end her career or define it forever. She was not infantry. She was not special operations. She was a communications specialist, trained to be the voice in the darkness, the lifeline between warriors and safety. But when every rescue asset was grounded by incoming weather, when the quick reaction force was pinned down at another location, and when command kept telling her to wait for authorization that might come too late, Maya understood something with terrible clarity. Sometimes the person who answers the call for help becomes the only one who can answer it in person. She grabbed her rifle, her radio pack, and a prayer, then stepped out into a war zone that had never been meant for someone like her. What would you do if following orders meant letting heroes die, but breaking them meant risking everything you had worked for? This is the true story of how one woman discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more. Maya Chun had never planned on being a hero. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, she was the quiet daughter of Chinese immigrants who ran a struggling restaurant and believed that hard work was the only language success understood. Her father had served briefly in the Taiwanese military before coming to America, and he raised his daughter with stories of discipline, duty, and the profound weight of serving something larger than yourself. When Maya was 18, she walked into a recruiting office not because she craved adventure, but because she needed a way to pay for college and wanted to prove to herself that she could survive something difficult. The Army recognized her aptitude for technology and communications almost immediately. She excelled in training, her natural patience and attention to detail, making her an exceptional signal operator. She learned to manage complex communication systems, to troubleshoot equipment under pressure, and to remain calm when voices on the other end of the radio were anything but calm. Her instructors noted her unusual ability to stay focused during chaos, a quality that would later save lives in ways no one could have predicted. After completing her advanced training, Maya was assigned to a forward operating base in Kunar Province, one of the most dangerous regions in Afghanistan where American forces regularly engaged with Taliban fighters and foreign insurgents flowing across the Pakistani border. Life on the FOB was a strange mixture of boredom and terror. Days could pass with nothing more exciting than equipment maintenance and routine check-ins, and then suddenly the radio would explode with urgent traffic as a patrol made contact with enemy forces. Maya learned to live in that tension, to stay ready while hoping she would never need to use that readiness. She became known as Whisper 6, her call sign earned because of her calm, measured voice that never wavered no matter how desperate the situation on the other end. Soldiers who had never met her in person knew her voice like a lifeline, a steady presence guiding them through ambushes, coordinating medevacs, and talking wounded men through their darkest moments until help arrived. The Delta Force operators who rotated through the FOB were different from regular infantry. They moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of years of training and countless missions. They kept to themselves mostly, but Maya had earned their respect through her professionalism and discretion. Captain Marcus Webb, the team leader, had personally thanked her after she coordinated a complex extraction that saved 2 of his men. He told her that good communications personnel were worth their weight in gold, and Maya had felt a pride she rarely allowed herself to express. She did not know that in 3 weeks, she would be the only thing standing between his team and death. The mission briefing had been classified at a level Maya was not supposed to access, but fragments filtered through the communication traffic she monitored. Captain Webb's team was inserting into a remote mountain valley to capture or eliminate a high-value target. A Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed dozens of American and coalition soldiers. The insertion would happen at night, a helicopter dropping the 16-man team onto a ridge from which they would move on foot to the target compound. Maya's role was straightforward: maintain communication with the team throughout the operation and coordinate any support they might need. The first hours went according to plan. Maya tracked their progress through periodic check-ins, each one confirming they were moving toward the objective without contact. The FOB Operations Center was quiet, staffed by a skeleton crew during the late hours. Major Peterson, the officer in charge, monitored the situation from his desk while sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Maya noted the weather reports with growing concern. A storm system was moving in faster than predicted, bringing heavy snow and winds that would ground helicopters and complicate any extraction. She flagged this to the major, who acknowledged it with a nod but showed no particular alarm. Delta operators were trained for harsh conditions. At 0300, Captain Webb reported they had reached the compound and were preparing to breach. The next transmission was confused, fragmented, Webb's voice tight with controlled urgency as he reported heavy resistance and casualties. Maya's fingers flew across her console, requesting immediate air support and medevac, but the responses came back negative. The weather had deteriorated too rapidly. All aircraft were grounded until conditions improved, which forecasters estimated would not happen for at least 6 hours. Maya relayed this information to the team, hearing the frustration in Webb's acknowledgement. The final transmission came at 0347. Webb reported they were withdrawing to a secondary position, that they had wounded who needed immediate evacuation, and that enemy forces were massing for a counterattack. Then his voice cut off mid-sentence, replaced by static that seemed to fill the entire operations center. Maya tried every frequency, every backup protocol, every trick she had learned in 5 years of service. Nothing. 16 men had simply vanished into the static, and Maya was staring at equipment that refused to tell her whether they were alive or dead. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Major Peterson ordered Maya to keep trying while he contacted higher command for guidance. The responses were frustratingly bureaucratic. Wait for weather to clear. Wait for authorization. Wait for assets to become available. Maya understood military procedure and the reasons behind it, but she also understood mathematics. The team had reported casualties. They had reported enemy forces massing. 6 hours was not a timeline. It was a death sentence. She pulled up the topographical maps she had studied during previous operations, tracing the route Webb's team had taken and identifying their likely secondary position. The location was 8 kilometers from the FOB, through terrain that was treacherous but not impossible. The decision formed in her mind with a clarity that surprised her. She was not infantry, but she had completed basic combat training. She was not special operations, but she knew exactly where those men were and what they needed. She was not authorized to leave her post, but authorization was a word that meant nothing to the families who would receive folded flags if she did nothing. Maya made her choice in the span of a single heartbeat, though the weight of it would stay with her forever. She grabbed her rifle from the weapons rack, shouldered her radio pack, and slipped out of the operations center while Major Peterson was on the phone with command. The cold hit her immediately, a biting wind that carried the first flakes of the incoming storm. Maya moved quickly through the FOB, avoiding the few personnel still awake, until she reached the perimeter gate. The guard on duty was a young private who knew her from shared meals in the mess hall. He asked where she was going, and Maya told him she was checking communication equipment at a forward position. The lie came easily, though it sat heavy in her stomach. The private waved her through, and Maya stepped out of the relative safety of the FOB into the darkness of one of the most dangerous places on Earth. She moved by memory and instinct, using terrain features to navigate rather than lights that would reveal her position. The training she had dismissed as merely adequate during basic proved more valuable than she had ever imagined. Every sound made her heart race. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy, but she kept moving. The radio on her back crackled occasionally with traffic from the FOB, Major Peterson's increasingly urgent calls for her to respond. Maya turned the volume down, but could not bring herself to turn it off entirely. She was still a communications specialist, even as she walked into a war zone that had never been meant for someone like her. The terrain was brutal, rocky slopes covered in loose scree that shifted beneath her boots, and threatened to send her tumbling into the darkness below. Maya fell twice, opening a gash on her palm that she wrapped hastily with gauze from her first aid kit. The cold deepened as she climbed, the wind driving snow into her face with needles of ice. She had never felt so alone, so small against the vastness of mountains that seemed designed to kill anyone foolish enough to challenge them. But somewhere ahead, 16 men were counting on help that the military had decided could not be provided. Maya was not the cavalry, but she was what they had. After 3 hours of movement, Maya heard the first sounds of gunfire echoing across the valley. She adjusted her direction, moving toward the sound with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. Gunfire meant the team was still alive, still fighting. She pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning in her muscles and the voice in her head that kept asking what exactly she planned to do when she arrived. She was one person with a rifle and a radio. Against whatever force was attacking Delta, she was nothing. But she was not nothing. She was communications, and communications could be more powerful than any weapon. As Maya approached the sound of fighting, she began working the radio, cycling through frequencies until she found one with less interference. The storm had disrupted primary channels, but left some secondary frequencies partially functional. She managed to establish a weak connection with an Air Force controller at Bagram, explaining the situation in rapid, precise language that cut through bureaucratic hesitation. The controller told her what she already knew. No aircraft could fly in these conditions. But Maya did not ask for aircraft. She asked for artillery. The FOB had a battery of 155mm howitzers that could reach the valley where Webb's team was fighting. Artillery did not care about weather. Artillery did not need clear skies. Maya provided coordinates based on her position and the direction of enemy fire, requesting a fire mission that would buy the team time until conditions improved. The controller hesitated, explaining that fire missions required approval from multiple levels of command. Maya's voice went cold and steady as she replied that approval was above her pay grade, but coordinates were not. She would take responsibility. She would face whatever consequences came. But she would not let those men die because paperwork moved slower than bullets. The first artillery rounds landed with a thunder that shook the mountains themselves. Maya watched from her concealed position as explosions bloomed on the far side of the valley where she had estimated enemy positions. The gunfire directed at Webb's team slackened almost immediately, the Taliban fighters either killed, wounded, or retreating from the unexpected bombardment. Maya adjusted fire twice more, walking the rounds closer to what her map told her was the enemy's likely staging area. She was not trained for this. She was learning as she went, applying principles from manuals she had read during slow nights on watch. Every adjustment risked putting rounds on friendly positions, but doing nothing risked something worse. When the artillery stopped, Maya moved forward. She found Webb's team in a natural depression between two rock formations, their positions marked by the bodies of enemies who had tried to overrun them. The Delta operators had formed a tight perimeter, wounded men in the center, able-bodied fighters covering every approach. When Maya appeared in the pre-dawn light, Captain Webb actually laughed, a sound of pure disbelief that cut through the exhaustion on his face. He asked her how she had gotten there, how she had called in the artillery, how a radio operator had materialized in the middle of a mountain firefight like some kind of guardian angel. Maya did not have answers that made sense. She only had a radio and a refusal to accept that nothing could be done. She established communications with the FOB, explaining the team's status and providing detailed information about wounded personnel. The storm was finally beginning to clear, and she heard the most beautiful sound of her life. Helicopter rotors echoing across the valley as medevac birds launched from Bagram. Major Peterson's voice came over the radio, a mixture of fury and grudging respect as he told her they would discuss her unauthorized departure when she returned. The extraction took 2 helicopter trips to complete. 4 of the 16 operators had been killed in the initial ambush, their bodies carried out with the same care given to the living. 8 more were wounded, 2 critically. But the remaining survivors were alive because artillery had arrived when air support could not, called in by a communications specialist who had no business being anywhere near the fighting. Maya was the last to board the final helicopter, her eyes sweeping the valley one more time before the bird lifted off and carried them all toward safety. The aftermath was complicated in ways Maya had not anticipated. She faced an Article 15 hearing for abandoning her post without authorization, a serious charge that could have ended her career. Major Peterson testified against her initially, describing her departure as a breach of discipline that could have resulted in her death and the loss of valuable communication capabilities at the FOB. But then Captain Webb testified, and the surviving members of his team submitted written statements describing how Maya's actions had directly saved their lives. The commanding general reviewed the case personally, weighing the undeniable breach of protocol against the equally undeniable outcome. The decision was a formal letter of reprimand that would remain in her file, paired with a Bronze Star for valor that would remain there as well. Maya accepted both with the same quiet composure she brought to everything. She understood why both were necessary. The military could not function if every soldier decided unilaterally when to follow orders and when to ignore them. But it also could not pretend that what Maya had done was ordinary, or that the lives saved were somehow separate from the rules broken. She had disrupted the system in order to serve the deeper purpose the system existed to protect. Whether that made her a hero or a problem depended entirely on perspective. Maya returned to duty after a brief period of evaluation, but things were different. Other soldiers looked at her with a mixture of respect and uncertainty, unsure how to categorize someone who had done something so far outside her designated role. The Delta operators who had survived maintained contact with her, sending occasional messages of gratitude that meant more than any official recognition. Captain Webb visited her once before his team deployed again, telling her that leadership was not about rank or position. Leadership was about seeing what needed to be done and having the courage to do it, regardless of the cost. He said she had taught him something that night, that sometimes the most important reinforcement comes from the most unexpected direction. Maya served 2 more tours before leaving the Army, eventually using her GI Bill benefits to earn a degree in emergency communications management. She built a career training others in crisis response, teaching them that systems and protocols existed for good reasons, but that the people within those systems had to remain capable of independent judgment. She never forgot those 16 men in the mountains, the 4 who did not come home, or the moment when she decided that doing nothing was the only unacceptable option. Her story became part of unofficial military legend, shared among communication personnel, as both inspiration and cautionary tale. Sergeant Maya Chen's story resonates because it challenges comfortable assumptions about heroism and duty. She was not trained for combat, not selected for special operations, not chosen by anyone to be the person who would walk into that war zone and bring those men home. She chose herself. In a moment when waiting for someone else to act would have meant accepting deaths she knew she might be able to prevent. Her choice was not reckless. It was calculated, grounded in her understanding of terrain, communications, and the capabilities available to her. She did not charge blindly into danger. She brought her expertise into a situation that desperately needed it, adapting skills developed for one purpose to serve another. The lessons of Maya's journey extend far beyond military service. She demonstrated that competence in any field can become leadership when circumstances demand it. She showed that following rules and understanding when rules must yield to higher principles are not contradictions, but complementary aspects of mature judgment. She proved that courage is not the province of any particular role or gender, that the person who answers the call might be exactly the person no one expected. Her story asks us to consider what we would do in similar circumstances, whether we would have the conviction to act when action was dangerous and uncertain, or whether we would hide behind procedure while people we could have helped slipped away. Maya never called herself a hero. She said she was simply someone who could not live with the alternative. Perhaps that is what heroism really means, not the absence of fear or doubt, but the presence of something stronger than both. Her story stands as testament that ordinary people, placed in extraordinary circumstances, can discover reserves of courage they never knew they possessed. And sometimes, the person who saves the day is just the radio operator who refused to accept that the day could not be saved.